This one has the makings of an adventure into the unknown. This is an Epiphone flat top from the very early 1970s, just after production was moved from the US to Japan, where they were produced by Aria at the Matsumoku Guitar Works. I wonder what their corporate song was like when they were doing the morning calisthenics. Wood comes in, guitars go out. That's what Matsumoku Guitar Manufacturing Concern is all about. If you got that, I love you. This is an FT147, and they cost about $120 at the time. And unfortunately, they have not kept up with inflation. Again, because of that, they fall into this strange stratum of Japanese guitars that sound good, they're nicely crafted, but they're not worth a whole lot. This one is made from laminated materials. Not every laminated guitar sounds bad, of course. This is also in great shape cosmetically, and it's got significant emotional value to the owner. So we might be doing something crazy, like resetting the neck, a procedure that might cost as much as this guitar is worth on the market. And as usual, if you moan about that, I will ignore you, not your guitar. Don't care. The interesting thing is, I don't know what's inside this neck joint. I've worked on other similar Epiphones of the period. Slightly later ones have bolt-on necks that function just like a Fender Electric. They have a massive neck block in them. They're a little cover plate on the back with 4 big screws that go all the way up into the neck. Presumably that was a Norlin cost-cutting measure. I actually don't mind, because I can reset those necks at a price that people don't have to think about. I may have even filmed a video of 1 or 2 of those. I can't remember. If you send me a message asking which video includes a particular guitar from 2 years ago, I will shrug, because I don't catalog it all, and there are many, many similar jobs which you do not get to see, which get mixed up in my brain with those that you have. For me, it's always just get it done and move on to the next one. Sometimes I'm filming multiple jobs at once, and it becomes a big blur. It's like video ephemera. Guitar repair people don't like resetting Japanese necks from the 70s because there are too many questions. Sometimes the large corporations were actually overseeing a number of other smaller manufacturers, and as long as the outsides looked the same, they really didn't care how they were assembled, because there was an assumption that every effort would be made to produce a good product, right? So we get necks that have the familiar dovetail, and others that have dowels in them. Some of them are put together with hide glue, others have like a urea resin, and then others have epoxy, and you won't know, because records weren't really kept. Online resources for this stuff are full of guys who have lots of hearsay they can share, but very little experience. Yamaha guitars usually have dovetails, but they were often assembled with glue all over the front face of the body on the sides here, which can make removal pretty arduous and unpredictable. I put a couple of pictures of this thing up on Instagram this morning just to see if anyone had any experience with this neck joint, and unfortunately there was no consensus. One fellow, Fergus Customs, saw the picture and said, oh, he thought that it had a bridge doctor installed. But no, this is actually a factory original pearl dot here, probably hiding a screw to hold the bridge in place, which is kind of ironic. Like it's pre-drilled for a bridge doctor. But from the ones I've seen, these don't generally deform all that much in the lower bout. Laminated guitar and fairly heavy bracing. But, that's an original dot. This guitar has a neck block with a dado or a groove cut into its face to register this big diagonal bolstering block that's made of plywood, which runs under the fingerboard. This is a design feature on a lot of Japanese guitars. I've never seen one like this before. Is it to promote an even response if you're playing up high? Is it intended to keep the fingerboard from dipping downwards? Who knows? What interests me is that small acorn nut below it. What the heck is that doing there? Because it's very unusual. Am I looking at the end of a screw that runs into the base of the heel? Is it a bolt-on? Here's a photo and a blurb from a catalog insert of the time, which is interesting. There's not much to help us. It mentions an adjustable neck, which means it has a truss rod, and it also describes a French neck heel, which is a term that's new to me. I presume it's fancy ad copy to differentiate it from the wide, shallow heel you find on Gibson arch tops, for instance. I hope it is. I hope somebody designed a neck with one integral screw that emerges through the front of the block. Either mortise and tenon or just a flat front face of the heel dry. In this ideal scenario, no glue would be used. Because if it was, say goodbye to the idea of a reset. Absent some novel device based on the concept of a bearing puller, there'd be no way to pull a mortise and tenon that's been fully glued with a screw limiting the amount of wiggle you can inflict on it. You know what I mean? Because I can't push upwards in that case. The screw would be blocking the path of the neck coming upwards, so I'd have to pull it out, and overcoming the glue, the resistant force of a full mortise and tenon that's been glued, it's just not going to happen. Now there is a clue, something to take note of. In the position where I would expect that screw to be, there is a crack running along the heel here. And more ominously, another one that's up here. Just on one side of the neck. So I'm going to infer that that screw was driven into the end grain of the heel. If there's a one up here, it's blind. It doesn't emerge through the block. So in that case, we would hope it's maybe a dowel pin or something just for positioning's sake, rather than, I don't know how it would be screwed in place, unless it was done before the support block was put in, which I don't see happening. Let's get the preliminaries out of the way. The action is, on the bass side, it's okay. It's 6/64. On the treble, not so good. It's a little bit higher, actually. The adjustable saddle is bottomed out, and these strings are running basically in a straight line. There's no downward pressure. Neck relief is practically non-existent. 0.002 if we're lucky. I'm running through my collection of metric sockets here, figuring Japanese guitar, it's going to be metric. Seems to be 10 millimeters. A stubby screwdriver, ratcheting screwdriver. And we'll see what that does. It's just a nicely made acorn nut that bears against a washer. Okay, with the nut pulled out of there, I've got to say I'm not encouraged by what I'm seeing. I would expect to be able to shift this a little bit, even though the fingerboard extension is still glued onto the top. Although there is something just a little bit funny to me, and that's the way the binding has been cut off on the outside of the heel. So I got out one of my thinnest feeler gauges here, and look what I've discovered. There is a pocket. It's extremely tight. In some places I can't even slip the 0.002 feeler gauge in there. So, I think probably the thing to do is to release the fingerboard extension and then see what happens. Let's heat things up with the old Hanger 9 heat sealing iron. Luckily I do see gaps between the fingerboard and the body here. It's not like a Taylor neck that is sort of monolithic with the neck shaft continuing all the way to the end of the board, fitting into a deep recess. This seems more like a normal construction on this side of things. As the glue heats up, I keep getting whiffs of a urea formaldehyde resin, which is a high-temp thermoset glue that gets used in plywoods and that kind of thing. It's a strong glue, and I need to loosen things all the way to the edge of the body, which isn't easy. It's pretty tight there. I sent an email to the owner explaining that this next step here is, well, it's kind of a last-ditch effort. Maybe a little bit of glue trickled into the space between the end of what is now a theoretical mortise and tenon. Maybe it's holding things together. And if I can warm it up with the heat probes, it might come free. But again, if it's a true tightly fit mortise and tenon, there's just no way. Because I can't push the neck up from below, and I can't rock it back and forth because of the screw. The other scary prospect is maybe I shift it a little bit, but it doesn't come all the way free and gets stuck halfway. What do you do in that case? So I'm going to get it hot and I'll pull on it a sensible amount, but if it's too tight, I'm just going to leave it and try some other workarounds to lower the action. I've resorted to using the cheaper, slightly thicker foam cutters here because somewhere in Southern California there's a package with the good ones for me, which has been traveling around from various USPS postal destinations, including LAX, for more than a month. Okay, this has been blasting away for about 12 minutes now. The front of the heel and the body area is warm to the touch. It's hot. There's not a whole lot of wiggle going on. It's possible, of course, that the rods are actually acting as pins holding things together, so when I turn this off, pull them out, I'm just going to give it a couple of good tugs to see what happens. No, it's not moving at all. Now quickly, working under the assumption that there is glue in there that was softened during this procedure, just going to throw the band clamp on it and make sure that it's good and tight against the body. Of course, I'll be putting the nut back in place, which should hold things, but you know, better safe than sorry. I need to plug holes. These are larger than the ones I usually have to drill for the thinner probes from the Hotwire Foam Factory heaters. I also let this cook longer than usual, by about 3 or 4 minutes. You can see how the oxidized oil bakes off the surface and leaves the wood looking kind of raw. So I'll re-glue the fingerboard extension back down. I don't know if it's clear, but I've purposefully angled my strap clamp from down low on the heel to up high on the tail block. I'm hoping to offset some of the tipping action in the neck block to pull the body back into straightness and draw the neck down while I'm gluing the fingerboard back to the soundboard. This has got that strange angled support block under the fingerboard extension, which is going to make clamping really fun because, well, there's no place to put a clamp that isn't going to slide except directly on the transverse brace. So, you know, I'm going to pad up some clamps and clamp to it, which is not my usual method, but I can't get another one back here where I normally would unless I go all the way around the body and clamp onto the back, which is, it feels weird to me, but we do what we can. If I'm going to extend the string ramps, I like to give myself a guideline so I don't get too far off. It's possible to slant it one direction or the other, which would mess up the spacing. The saw kerf acts as a further guideline, keeps the Dremel tool on track. This is not the original saddle. This is an aftermarket one that was put in there sometime afterwards. I'm going to go ahead and lower it slightly by about a 32nd of an inch. This thing is called a marking gauge. It's available through any woodworking supplier. This saddle insert does not really function like the Gibson ones. There aren't threaded inserts in the soundboard under the bridge. This just rests on top, and there are a couple of washers which act as a bearing surface. So this is essentially levering itself up and down on the top surface of the bridge. Let's have a look at this fret wire they're using. It's about the normal width for a Martin wire, but if you look at the tang, you can see it has a very different kind of barb on it. Rather than being pressed laterally into the side of the tang like a normal wire, this has just been kind of bumped out on the bottom. And they're not evenly distributed or symmetrical bumps, which means every single fret was done by hand with something like a chisel or a punch or like a sharpened Warrington or cross peen hammer. It's another one of these dichotomies you find in inexpensive Japanese guitars of this period, along with things like chalk fit braces. It really blows my mind. I'm wicking some thin CA glue into the cracks. The owner of this guitar replaced the nut himself some time ago, and he did a pretty good job at it. Just going to finesse a few little things here. Okay, strings are on. This one goes in the L column. I can't call it a win. Hopefully it bookends the statement I made at the beginning of the video and demonstrates why guitar repair people don't like dealing with 1970s Japanese guitars, because this was a perfect illustration. And this is actually the first one I've ever had to really throw the towel in on. Maybe I even took it farther than was reasonable just to give it a try. You've heard me say before that anything is fixable if you have enough time and money to throw at it. What would that look like in this case? The most elegant solution would involve heating and removing the fingerboard, then taking a hacksaw and cutting the neck off close to the body using a chisel and cut-off wheels to get through the steel screws and the truss rod and stuff, and then making an entirely new bolt-on neck, correcting the angle, putting the fingerboard back on, dressing it, totally refretting it. Cost like $1,200, and I wouldn't do it though, if you asked me. If I have to put that much concerted effort into rescuing an instrument, it would have to be a different kind of guitar. Because human life is exceptionally brief, and there are other things to do, you know? So this ends up just barely better than when it arrived. Bass side is about the same at 6/64, and now it's just under 6/64 on the treble. So we got all of 1/64 lowering of the action on the treble side of this guitar. That's going to be enough for today.